3 days before our wedding, Evan took the rush load. "It's the bonus, Liv," he said, breathless through the headset, cab lights reflecting in his eyes. "Double mile rate, dock by Friday, easy turn." We lived in Portland then, blue state quiet, coffee thick as molasses, neighbors who hung pride flags and swapped sourdough starters like secrets. We picked a City Gardens venue by the river, the one with string lights and a big leaf maple that bends like a question. I had my dress steamed, my mother flying in, my maid of honor wrangling cousins and DJs and dietary preferences. I also had a fiancé who loved a clock and a highway more than he loved a plan made by anyone else. "You promised, Ev," I said, keeping my voice even. "No long haul the week of." "This isn't long," he said, already glancing at the dash. "Up and back. June purrs in this weather." June purrs. He didn't notice me flinch at the grammar, subject, verb, devotion. He kissed my forehead and tasted like gasoline and wintergreen gum. Then he was down the steps, rain flicking off his cap, hands tender on the door of his real commitment. A white plume of brake air sighed like relief, and the truck eased into traffic as if it had always been meant to leave. I didn't cry. Not then. I did what women in blue states do when disappointment is a weekly weather pattern. We multitask our way through it. I checked the florist, pivoted the taco cart to an indoor setup, texted the seamstress a last hem tweak, confirmed with the officiant. I told my mother everything was handled because she worries in a way that scatters a room. Then I sat at the table with the sample escort cards and tried to read his name without tasting diesel. It is funny what your memory keeps. Not the big fights. There weren't many, but small arithmetic. The empty chair at birthdays because Wyoming got snow early. The Valentine's reservation I ate with his best friend because dispatch messed up the route. The way he stroked the steering wheel with his thumb like a pulse. When he was home, he was golden, brimming with stories, sunburned and generous, the kind of tired that makes a man simple and grateful. He would take me to Sauvie Island for peaches and call me his mile marker, which sounds romantic until you realize it's still a distance term. He talked about children as if they were way stations. First the crib, then the Little League Diamond, then a second-hand Corolla with hand-me-down faith. On the second day of his up and back, that paused outside Medford for 6 hours. "Shipper delay," he texted. "Union line. Don't worry, I'll make it." I believed him the way the freeway believes the sign, because to do otherwise is to admit you're lost. I folded napkins into the shape of water lilies while Spotify played lofi beats and the rain shelved the sky into layers. I practiced my vows standing in socks on our hardwood floor, whispering promises to the window because it at least stayed put. On the third morning, the dot leapt north, too far north, past Tacoma. Past the place we once stopped for blackberry pie at 2 a.m. when the dash went dark and I held a flashlight while he swore lovingly at wiring. Up near Everett now, where the yards are stacked like Lego cities and the cranes peck at ships. He sent a voice memo, cheerful. "Got offered a top-off to Bellingham. It's practically on the way. 20 more cents a mile. Don't be mad, babe. This is good money. Practically on the way. 20 more cents." The sentence felt like a forklift bumping into all the delicate little stacks inside me. Boxes marked dress and timeline and mother's flight, and I matter. I set down my phone like it might bite, and made coffee that was too strong on purpose. I put on my coat and walked into the Portland drizzle because drizzle is democratic. It will wet anyone who steps outside and refuses to check the forecast. I walked past our venue to the river's edge and watched a barge shoulder itself downstream. Water has a way of letting you confess. Standing there, hands in pockets, I picture the marriage we'd have with this version of Evan, the one who is sweet when present and absent when counted on, whose joy is a route and whose God is a schedule. I pictured our future child asking when Daddy will be home, and me saying soon, in a voice that is a prayer against data. I pictured my own face in 10 years, good at contingency plans and very bad at believing anyone's ETA. That's the moment the decision arrived, not with thunder, but like a lane change you've been signaling for miles. I will not be the woman a rig eats alive. He called an hour later, a soft grin in his voice. The bonus hits if I clear the docks by 6. I'll gun it home after. We'll laugh about this in a week. We won't, I said, and I heard the road hum through the line, the way a body goes quiet when a predator turns its head. When you come back, don't bring the tux. Olivia.
Come home, I said.
But not to a wedding. The silence was long. The rain spoke for both of us. He finally muttered, "We'll talk when I get there." "Drive safe," I said and meant it. Love doesn't turn into a knife just because you put it down. But sometimes it becomes something sharper. A boundary. By nightfall, the Dow was angling south at last. He'd fallen out of love with the bonus somewhere after Seattle, or maybe with the illusion that I would forgive the freeway forever. I cleaned the kitchen the way you clean a rental before you turn in the keys. Polite, precise, without nostalgia. I set the 2 wedding bands side by side on a folded dish towel. I tucked my vows into a shoebox labeled later. And then I did something I had never done in all our miles. I went to the garage, opened the drawer where he keeps the tools, and slid my fingers over the cold, thin neck of a box cutter. Its blade flashed like a second thought. I closed it again and put it in my pocket. Not rage, not drama, just a plan. Because when a man makes a truck his first love, he should get to experience heartbreak in a language he understands. When people ask how long we were together, I have to measure it in seasons and highway exits. We met in late September under a canvas tent at a food truck fair in Selwood, when the leaves were going red and the air tasted like apples and diesel. He bought a banh mi, I bought a carton of curry fries, and we traded halves like kids on a school bench. His laugh came easily, like he had extra. He told me he drove long haul but knew how to turn the truck off, which meant he could sit through a movie without checking a load board. On our 3rd date, he brought me to the lot to meet June. On our 4th, he taught me how to pop the hood and listen for the kind of squeal that means a belt is lying to you. It felt like being introduced to a friend, loud, loyal, enormous. I grew up with teachers for parents, which means love was a steady dinner at 6 and a car that never needed naming. Evan's world dazzled me because it was the opposite. A country unspooling through the windshield, a jukebox of truck stop coffee, strangers who told their lives to a counter waitress and then were gone. He sent me pictures. Nebraska wheat like a haircut, Wyoming sky like a bruise blooming, the desert glowing like a low ember at 4 a.m. He would call from a rest area and describe the hush that falls when a lot full of engines finally sleeps. The first time I climbed into the cab and shut the door, the world went distant, as if life were something we could watch through a soundproof glass. We made rules early because distance loves to steal. He would text when he parked. I would not weaponize time zones. He would block off 1 weekend a month as sacred. I would plan nothing that required a non-refundable ticket without a backup plan. We wore those rules like charm bracelets, noisy, hopeful, mostly for show. The first time he broke one, it was for a blizzard. The second for a mechanical. The third for "can you believe this rate?" I learned to say "I understand" when what I meant was "I'm learning to live around a ghost." Still, he was tender when present. He warmed my feet under the covers with his calloused calves. He fixed my porch light without being asked. He cried when my dad went into surgery and sent flowers that looked like a sunrise. When he slept, he curled on his side like a boy who'd outrun recess and finally found grass. He could look at a highway map and guess the exact minute we'd hit sunlight after a storm. I loved those parts like you love the wide shoulder on a mountain pass, fiercely, gratefully, knowing it might vanish around the next bend. Planning the wedding was a slow negotiation with dispatch and fate. We picked a date in a month that is usually mild, booked a band that plays Springsteen without irony, chose tacos because hope tastes like lime. He nodded through vendor meetings, promising me he'd be there, and I believed because to do otherwise is to build a future out of warnings. My mother, who moved to Portland after the divorce because she wanted politics like a cushion, took one look at him and saw both my joy and my flaw. "He's a good man," she said softly. "Just make sure you aren't always waiting on him." I laughed because I didn't want to cry. The week the invitations went out, he was in Texas riding a humidity wave. He FaceTimed me from a Buc-ee's with a beaver the size of a toddler behind him and said, We should honeymoon on the road. You in the cab, me in the driver's seat, June humming like a lullaby. I said yes because I wanted to keep the game we play, turning his language into our life. Later, alone, I realized I had said yes to being a passenger on my own honeymoon. We argued only once in a way that felt like a car leaving the lane. I asked him, gently, to skip a load to make my sister's engagement dinner. He said he'd try. The day of, he texted, "Dispatcher put me on a hot route. Won't make it. Love you." I called him from the restaurant bathroom and said, "I need you to choose me sometimes." He said, "I am. This is for us." The check came, and I tipped too much because the server had been kind to a woman pretending not to be alone. So when he said double-mile rate, my body already knew the choreography. Make room, make jokes, make coffee, make it seem like I wasn't counting. But something shifts when the date on your calendar is carved in buttercream. The closer he got to Everett, the more the future looked like a time-lapse of me, aged in dog years of waiting. My chest learned a new verb, to throb like a signal lost in a canyon. The friends who adored him had never slept next to a phone that rings at 3 a.m. with a voice that says westbound shut down, see you next week. The women at work saw my ring and told me how lucky I was to have a man who works this hard. The men told me trucks are the veins of democracy. Both were right. Neither had to eat dinner with a silence that smelled like motor oil. The thing about blue state cities is they teach you to narrate your own life. Therapy, book clubs, yoga that asks you to name your intention. Mine used to be endure. Then, standing with the river licking the rocks and the bridge humming like a low chord, my intention changed to refuse. Refuse the postponement of me. Refuse the idea that the kind of love that leaves can be called devotion because it always comes back. That night, I laid our wedding bands on the dish towel like 2 coins for a ferryman. I wrote a note that started with "I love you," which is why I can't marry the road, and ended with "come home and talk to me as the man I chose, not the driver dispatch owns." Then I threw the note away because I was done writing to the cab. I wanted to talk to the person who stepped out of it. He texted from a truck stop north of Olympia, a photo of June under sodium lights, raindrops jeweled on the hood, his hand on the fender like a benediction. 3 hours, he wrote. Save me a kiss. I put my phone face down and walked to the garage. The box cutter was right where I'd left it. I opened it and watched the blade catch the bare bulb's light. There are 100 ways to hurt a man, and most of them leave marks you can't see. I chose the one that made sense to him. Not because I wanted to ruin him, but because I wanted to puncture the illusion he'd married, that the road would always bend around his choices and the woman at home would always patch the map. A boundary is not a wound. It is a line you paint on the pavement so nobody dies. I sat on the step and waited for the sound I knew by heart, an engine downshifting at the corner, the sneeze of air brakes, the cab settling like a giant exhale. When he turned onto our street at 2:13 a.m., I stood up, slid the box cutter into my hoodie pocket, and exhaled too. Not anger, not theater. Just a woman with steady hands, about to translate a feeling into a language the beloved finally understands. He parked with the care of a man laying a newborn in a crib. Even after 10 hours on the road, his gestures turned tender as he coaxed June against the curb. Headlights washed our garage door, painting our house in temporary daylight. He killed the engine, and the world rushed in, wind, wet, the faint percussion of a train somewhere toward the river. I expected him to stride straight to me, but he did what he always did first, the walk around. He checked the trailer seals, patted the mud flaps, crouched to eye the brake lines. I waited in the semi-dark, hands in my pockets, letting the rhythm of his ritual calm me the way it always had. Trucks don't work on feelings. They work on torque and attention. I had given him both. I wanted some back. He finally saw me, raised a hand, grinned the grin that used to tilt my world.
Babe.
I made good time. He jogged up the drive, kissed my cheek, like a neighbor, and said, "You smell like coffee." God, I missed our coffee. "I told you not to bring the tux," I said. He blinked, recalibrating. "Olivia, come on. I'm here."
I'm sorry.
I shouldn't have topped off the load. The rate. "I am not a rate," I said, and the quiet between us sharpened. He opened his mouth, then shut it and tried a new lane. Okay. I messed up, but I made it back. The wedding's still on. We can.
It isn't, I said.
It isn't on. The smile slipped. For a second I saw the boy he must have been, freckled, startled. Sure he could charm the substitute teacher. Let's go inside, he said softly, hands out. You're tired. I'm cooked. We'll sleep and do this right at sunrise. We've been doing this wrong for years at sunrise, I said. I've been doing it wrong by pretending your choices were a weather system I had to dress for. He rubbed his face, scraped by stubble, and for once didn't reach for a justification. He looked at the truck instead, at June, as if she might offer him a line. A tire hissed a little in the cooling, a settling breath. His eyes softened the way they do when he thinks about maintenance, routes and rotations and the safety that lives in schedules. I felt the final lock click in me. I pulled my hands from my pockets, and they were steady as an overpass. I'm not marrying you Saturday, I said. I'm not marrying a man whose first tenderness is for his rig. That's not fair, he said, voice going hoarse. The rig feeds us. That truck is our house and your dress, and my patience, I said. You're good at telling stories where the truck is the hero and I'm the faithful sidekick. He flinched.
Don't do this.
Not now. Not after. After you chose a bonus over your vows? Over a date, he shot back. Vows happen at the altar. No, I said, and felt a stillness bloom, cool and clean. They happen in the days before it. He stepped closer. Live, please. There are pauses in a life that work like bells. This was one. I could have folded. The old choreography. Hug, promise, joke, breakfast, pretend. Instead, I stepped around him toward the curb. The tires sat black and smug, fat with air and the confidence of machines that have never been told no. I knelt, flicked the box cutter open, and pressed the blade to rubber. A soft shudder ran through the sidewall. A question. I answered. The slit whispered first, then the breath came. A long, urgent exhale, a deflating truth. The truck sagged a fraction, the way a liar does when he realizes the room is done clapping. Olivia. Evan lunged, catching my wrist too late to save the first tire. Air roared between us, like an argument no one wins. I shook him off, walked to the next, and drew the line again, clean, quick, controlled. The second tire sighed its surrender. He stumbled back as if I'd taken a swing at him. What are you doing? Speaking your language, I said. Translating a feeling. That's thousands of dollars, he choked. So is a venue deposit, I said. So is a dress. So is dignity when you keep overdrawing it. He stood there, jaw working, hands helpless. I didn't touch the steers. Never safety, never something that would endanger him on a highway. Just the rears, enough to make him stop, to make him call for help, to make him stay put long enough to hear me. We stood in the steam of rain and rage, the truck slumping slightly lower with each breath it lost. The neighborhood stayed asleep, democracy of drizzle masking the sound. My heart was not a drum. It was a metronome. Listen, I said. Not to me.
To this.
I pointed at the hissing tire. That's the sound of what you do to me when you say one more mile, one more load, one more rate, and treat my wishes like roadside litter. That's the air leaving a plan. That's the future going flat. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, he looked human, not heroic. I was trying to make our life better, he said, small. It's not better if I don't get to live in it, I said. We went inside without the old choreography. I left my wet hoodie on a chair. He didn't line his boots neatly by the mat. I made him coffee because kindness is not a faucet you shut off to make a point. We sat at opposite ends of the table like adults who had both run out of make-believe. I'm ending the engagement, I said. I'll call the vendors in the morning. He swallowed. Do I get a say? You had 1,000, I said softly. Every time you chose the road. He put his head in his hands, and I saw the man I loved, the capable, laugh-warm, generous version, drowning in his own logic. I wanted to throw him a rope. Instead, I put the box cutter on the table between us and slid it so the handle touched his fingers. You can fix the tires, I said. You always do. But we can't keep skin patching a life with holes in the sidewalls. He nodded once, a broken movement. What happens now? Now, I said, you call your roadside service and learn how it feels to wait. He dialed the number like penance, voice steadying into the professional cadence he used on CB and with dispatchers. 2 rears. Residential street. No injuries. The operator gave him an ETA, and for the first time in years the waiting belonged to him. He paced, checked the window, paced again. I brewed a second pot and texted my mother. Change of plans. I'm okay. We'll call at 9. I texted my maid of honor. No wedding. I love you. Promise details later. I turned the phone face down so pity wouldn't leak in and make a mess. The blue state morning woke around us. Garbage truck, cyclists with blinking red tails, a jogger in a beanie that matched the fog. You'd think the world would flare when a life reroutes. It doesn't. It notes your turn signal and keeps going. Evan stood in the doorway with his arms crossed like a bridge holding a river back. You could have just said the words, he murmured, not unkind. I did, I said. For years. He nodded, winced, nodded again. Why tires? Because they don't lie, I said. They are either inflated or not. And, because you feel them, you don't feel my calendar until it blows. He leaned his shoulder against the jamb, looking past me at the mug on the table I'd set for him. I do love you. I know, I said, and the knowing hurt worse than if he didn't. Loving is not the same as choosing. But you love the road more. You love who you are in the cab, decider, solver, the man who arrives. With me you have to be the man who stays. He looked down. Staying is harder. Yes, I said. That's why it counts. The roadside truck arrived with a yawn of hydraulics and 2 men in jackets that had lived 3 other lives. They were kind in the way working people are to private grief, eyes averted, jokes soft as felt. They jacked June like a patient and rolled off rubber like peeling fruit. Evan hovered, hands stiff, answering questions with technical precision and no story at all. I watched from the window and felt a peace I didn't expect. Not triumph. Not even relief. Just an end to a kind of vertigo I had trained myself to call romance. When the new tires sat black and gleaming, one of the men tipped his cap toward the house with a gesture that said bless whatever this was. They rumbled away. Evan stood in the street with his hands on his hips, back to me, and for a moment he looked like a monument to an era I was leaving. Man versus distance, love versus dispatch, hope versus schedule. Then he came inside and sat. I'll move my stuff to the spare room, he said quietly, till I find a sublet. You can keep the lease through the month, I said. I'll go to my sister's for a bit. He shook his head.
No.
I did this. I'll take the couch. We split the day into chores because logistics steadies grief. He called vendors and practiced the sentence the wedding is postponed until the word felt like a mercy killing. I called my mother and practiced breathing while she practiced not saying I told you so. Friends texted litanies of anything you need, and I answered thank you, because need is a private room with the door shut. In the afternoon, I walked to the venue with a box to collect favors that suddenly looked like a joke, tiny succulents meant to live forever if you remember to water them. The coordinator hugged me with professional compassion and a human squeeze that said she had watched this before. You're not the first, she murmured. You won't be the last. But you might be the bravest. I shook my head.
No.
Just done. On the way home I passed a mural of a salmon leaping a painted dam, water frozen in spray. Someone had spray-painted shoes across the fish in a thin gold line. I laughed out loud and scared a crow. Evening slowed the neighborhood into its old lullaby. Evan sat on the stoop like he had at 20, hands clasped, looking at nothing. I kept thinking if I could get one more load before the wedding, we'd start ahead, he said to the desk. I didn't notice I was always starting. You noticed, I said gently. You just called it hustle. He nodded. The tires, he stopped, searching. It wasn't the money. No, I said. It was the physics. He laughed once, surprised. You're meaner than you look. I'm kinder than you think, I said. I picked the rears. He wiped his face and didn't pretend it was rain. Do we have a later? I sat beside him and let our shoulders touch because endings need touch too. I don't know. Maybe when you can love me without checking your ETA. We watched a bus sigh at the corner, kneel to let a woman step down with a bouquet that didn't match any dress. The city glowed without asking us to prove we belonged to it. That night, I slept in our bed alone for the first time since he moved in, and I dreamed not of roads but of rooms, a bright kitchen, a stack of books, a calendar with my name on it. I woke before dawn and enrolled in a night class I had bookmarked for months, data for decision makers at PSU. I made a breakfast that wasn't rushed. I wrote return tux on a sticky note and smiled because it felt like a line item in a brand new budget. When he woke, he stood in the doorway like he had the first time he came back from a 2-week haul, tired, shy, grateful to find me still there. He opened his mouth. I raised a hand. No promises, I said. No routes. Just today. He nodded. He took the box cutter from the table and set it gently back in the drawer. That thing could cut your thumb, he murmured in a voice caught between joke and prayer. It didn't, I said. It cut a cord. The thing about endings is that they ask for ceremony even when you refuse a stage. We didn't march to a string quartet. We divided the kitchen drawers like diplomats. He took the spice blends named after states he'd driven through. I kept the Dutch oven and the habit of seasoning food enough for two. We made a pile for Goodwill that looked like a thrift store's dream, cake toppers nobody danced under, a garland that spelled forever in letters that didn't know irony, a guest book that had collected the signatures of exactly 3 nieces who wanted to practice cursive. My mother flew in anyway. She hugged me as if I'd returned from a war I hadn't enlisted in. You're strong, she whispered into my hair, then pulled back to check my face for cracks. But you're allowed to be wrecked. I'm not wrecked, I said, and was startled to hear the truth of it in my own mouth. I'm rerouted. Evan carried boxes to the truck in trips that made him a stranger in our doorway. He didn't try to make a grand speech. He knew, finally, that the only language we had left was detail. At noon he came back in empty-handed and stood in our kitchen like a museum visitor. I can store June at my cousin's yard in Gresham for a while, he said. Take regional runs. Be home more. I nodded. If that's what you want. It's what might bring you back, he said, and there it was again. The road as an offering. I shook my head. I won't be brought back. I'll walk if I decide to. He absorbed that like weather. Right. A beat. I'm sorry I made you bilingual entire. I'm not, I said. It saved me from writing poems you wouldn't read. We shared a last dinner because it felt right to bless the kitchen that had held our attempts. I cooked pasta with too much garlic. He brought home a 6-pack from the bodega, where the clerk had memorized his route stories. We ate like sober people at a wake, quiet, grateful, tasting everything. After, he stood and put his palms on the table. Thank you, he said, and I realized he meant not for dinner, but for the whole thing. The trying, the patience, the map I drew when he forgot he needed one. He left at dusk. He didn't look back because drivers don't. Mirrors are for what's behind you, not for the person on the porch. He put his hand on June's door the way a man pats a horse he has ridden hard, then climbed up and pulled the world shut. The engine turned over, found its note, and the rig eased away, 2 brand new rears rolling like promises he might keep for someone else. The house inhaled. I walked room to room, touching corners, telling the air we were done pretending. I put the rings in a small velvet box and mailed them to the jeweler with a letter that said repurpose. I sent the venue coordinator a playlist for some future bride who would dance under our lights. I sent the taco cart a tip because gratuity honors labor even when plans change. Then I did the smallest, bravest thing I have ever done. I made a new key for myself and put it on a ring that had only one job. I put the box cutter in the back of the drawer and slid the drawer shut. I washed the dish towel and used it on an ordinary Wednesday. I registered for 2 classes and a pottery workshop because I wanted my hands to make shapes that stay. Weeks later, Evan texted a photo from a rest area outside Hood River. Sunrise icing the river. June parked neat, a thermos steaming in his hand. Regional now, he wrote. thinking about counseling. I miss you. I miss us. I stared at the picture for a long time, and then I called, because grown women don't ghost their old lives. We talked for 42 minutes about small things: fuel prices, my mother's new haircut, the way clay collapses if you rush the spin. He didn't make a pitch. I didn't make a promise. When we hung up, my cheeks were wet and my shoulders were light. On a Saturday that was supposed to be our wedding, I woke to sunlight that had no appointment with vows. I put on sneakers and ran across the steel bridge while the Willamette threw diamonds at my feet. I stopped halfway and looked down at the water sliding under the city we both loved for different reasons. I said out loud, to no one, to everyone, I choose to stay with myself. If you need a moral, there isn't one. There's physics and there's love, and sometimes the two argue. If you need an image, take this. A woman in a blue state city, holding a blade not as a weapon but as a translation device, a truck breathing out the last of a lie, a man learning to wait on a curb at 2:13 a.m. and call it mercy. People will say, I went too far. People who have never waited for a door to open that was busy loving its hinges. But the truth is simpler and kinder. I made the last act match the language of the story. He gave his heart to the miles. I gave the miles back to him, minus the air he kept stealing from me. A month later, I sat in a classroom with a pencil and a future, and the professor wrote trade-offs on the board in tidy letters. I underlined the word twice. On the walk home, I passed a tire shop where a mechanic rolled a black ring into the light, and I smiled, not because of what I'd done, but because I finally understood how to keep moving without erasing where I stand. And if you're wondering whether Evan and I ever found a later, here's what I can give you without lying. He sent me a photo of June with new sidewall lettering that read home is a verb. I sent back a photo of a clay bowl, lopsided and perfect, with a glaze the color of the river at noon. Neither of us asked for a route. Neither of us promised an arrival time. For now, I don't wait. I live. And the road, bless it, keeps being exactly what it is. Long, loud, honest.